So I'm Emily, and I work here as a developer. Sadly, I mostly do back-end stuff, so that's why I'm not doing a ReactJS talk. I'm doing this, but hopefully it'll be useful for you. Yes, so Luke's kindly done this bit for me, so I won't do this bit. That's good. But if you want to tweet us about this talk, that's the handle there. So, tech challenges and tests. So when you apply for jobs, the people potentially hiring you are very scared that you're useless. They're scared that you can't code, that despite your CV and your experience, you're going to get the job and you're going to do a terrible job. So what they do is they do loads of tech challenges and tech tests to test you out. And the idea is they're trying to weed out useless people and get people who are good. And that little pig is called Petunia Pancake, and she's competing in a state fair somewhere in America. So what I mean by technical tests, I mean things like take-home coding challenges, where you get given a code challenge and told, oh, you've got a week to do it, and then you have to hand it in. So how many people have done something like that here? Yeah, okay, so you know the kind of thing I mean. Technical quizzes, so by that I mean sort of the short questions with short answers. So you get asked things like, unfortunately I'm not going to be able to do a JavaScript example, but say if it was Java, it would be, what's the difference between final, finally, and finalize? And then you give this standard answer. And then whiteboard challenges, everyone's favorite. This is where you get given a more open-ended question, and you have to do some coding or diagrams, something like that, on a whiteboard with your interviewer or interviewers interacting with you whilst you're doing it. And how many people have done them before? Yeah, they're pretty scary, right? Yeah. And then pair programming challenges, which I would say are similar to whiteboard challenges, only you have to do it at your computer and type. And maybe you've got a piece of paper there where you can draw diagrams. It depends. Although you get remote pair programming challenges as well, which sound extra scary. And that was meant to be on the next line. But you also have technical interviews where they're gauging what you know, but through a conversational style. So rather than say, so maybe they talk to you and they want to know if you know about technology X, they would say, oh, I see you've had experience in technology X. Can you tell us how you used it? What do you think was good about this? If you had to revisit your decision, would you use a competitor? Or that kind of thing. So they're trying to get your technical knowledge out, but in the course of a conversation, which hopefully flows a little bit more naturally. And of course, there's loads of others because, you know, people are very inventive and there's so many different ways of trying to do this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through from the beginning and give sort of tips on each of them specifically. And I probably won't get to the end because this talk was really designed to be 55 minutes long. So when I get to like 25 minutes, which I think is the amount of time, I'll just stop pretty much. So let's see, if I started at 40, okay, that's right. So first though, a few general tips. And these tips are about the emotions of doing technical tests and challenges, because this is the bit which can really scupper you. Because technical challenges and tests, they can be really scary. And the scary thing about them, I think, is that someone's put it there as a way of designing whether you'd be good at that job. And which implies that if you fail the test, you wouldn't be good at that job. And if you at all have any doubts about your ability, or if you're sort of less experienced and you haven't had that experience to build up to prove to yourself that you're good at your job, it can be really upsetting and scary, that sort of feeling of failure and being judged. But I would like to tell you, I'd like to get across that if you fail one of these technical tests, it's completely normal and everyone does it. Even the most experienced, brilliant engineers, if you ask them, they'll have loads of failed technical tests in their history. I mean, first of all, these things are often incredibly only tangentially related to your actual job you'd be doing. And that's just because companies have no other way of testing, really. They can't. Ideally, they get you in for a month and trial you out, but that wouldn't be practical. So it's normally got nothing to do with your actual job. Also, it's designed to weed out people, but it's optimized for getting, for reducing false negatives rather than false positives. So say if you're brilliant at your job and they rejected you, they won't find out about it and they won't care. They'll just go, oh, well, that's all right. But if you're really bad at your job and they hire you, well, that is a disaster for them. So sort of the fact that you might be really good at this job and they didn't hire you, well, that's just collateral damage, really. It's just a thing. So if you look at it like that, you can see that it's completely normal to fail these technical tests. So when you're doing them, don't worry about failing them, and that'll hopefully make it a lot easier. Instead, try and go in with a more positive learning mindset. I like cute babies. Okay, so you might not know the answers to a question. Could you ask your interviewer about what the answer could be and get the information so that you can use it for your next interview? Or maybe you're going to have an awful interview or awful tech test, but throughout the course of it, you're going to learn that you would be working with a bunch of jerks. Well, that's really good information to have learned, and you've dodged a bullet. Don't work for them. Go and work for nice people instead. I've got a story of a guy I used to work with, and we both did the same tech interview, which was kind of a whiteboard type thing. And he said that he was doing terribly at it. He didn't know any of the questions, didn't know how to answer it, but he thought, you know what, these people seem quite clever and nice. I'm going to ask them as many questions and write it all down for my next interview. And they ended up hiring him on the basis that even if he didn't know it now, he would soon know it because he was so good at learning. Like, I don't think that necessarily would happen very often. That's an unusual case. But having that learning mindset turns a terrible situation into a positive. So yeah, try and do that instead of being scared. So specific advice. Take-home coding challenges. These are actually my favorite ones because I think of it like this. Here's your time, and that's the output of all your work. And then eventually, you'll have done enough work that your challenge is good enough that you could submit it, and you would probably get hired, right? So your main task to begin with when you're given a challenge is just a scheduling task. So you look at the challenge, and you work out how much time you think it's going to take you, and then you double it, like always. And then you look at what free time you have, which might be no free time if, like me, you've got a toddler at home to look after. And you try and work out when you're going to do it. And if you don't have enough time to do it, don't struggle on and do a terrible job. Go back to them and renegotiate. Or if you don't have enough time to do it and you're not that fussed about the job, well, don't bother doing it. Put your time into getting a better job. So that's my advice, to first look at the timings of it. And if you get your timings right, barring not doing these no-nos, you probably stand a good chance of passing the coding challenge. So here are my no-nos. Not actually doing the challenge, by which I mean you haven't read the instructions and you do something completely different. even if you've written really good code, and I've had code submitted to me, which was really good and impressive, but it was like the person hadn't read the actual challenge. Or you get stuff that's submitted and it looks all right, but it just doesn't compile or do anything. So the first thing is actually do it. Yeah, okay. You need it to actually work. Okay, here's the one that happens a surprising amount. And it comes from a good place. You'll be reading the code and someone's really tried to make it readable because it's they want the person reading it to understand. So they put in lots of comments like loads in the input above a function called loads input. And it's coming from a good place, but where it reads as immature code when you read it. So don't do that if possible. Instead, try and look at how you can get your code to self-document as much as possible. Jumbled code. So often with these challenges, there's this core bit, which is some algorithm or some problem that you're solving. So don't mess that up with all like input-output parsing or something like that. Have the nice stuff there so your reviewer can read it. I mean, that kind of goes for all coding, really. Try and put the meaty stuff there and try and factor out all the annoying stuff. No unit tests. So it's going to depend on your reviewers. They're going to have a list of criteria of what they want, but some reviewers won't tell you about it, but they'll just fail you automatically if you don't have unit tests. Especially if your job description has TDD in it. You want to write unit tests, otherwise you'll just be an automatic fail. The plus side of this is if you have unit tests, you can make sure that you've actually done the challenge and your code is actually working. And you're front-end developers, and you can do unit tests, but sometimes it'll be less easy than for me with my back-end development, right? So I don't know if there's things like maybe Selenium you could use to something to prove that it works. You lot would know better than me. What do you reckon? Sorry.
So there are some front-end stuffs like Mocha, and sometimes JS stuff, of course, snapshot testing, yeah.
Okay, so there's options there. Just, yeah. So as long as you don't do those things, you've got your timing worked out, you should be okay with this. Some other tips: if you have to write in a language you're not quite comfortable in, consider writing it in your first language that you're most comfortable in and then rewriting it in a different language. It might not work in every situation, but by writing it in your comfortable language, you get to work out your algorithms and everything beautifully without bothering about worrying about syntax, and then you do a conversion. It's just something to consider. Once you've submitted, they're going to want to talk to you about your code. So be aware of this as you go along. You can write notes about trade-offs you made, decisions you made, just so that you're armed with notes when you have that discussion. Oh, okay, those are my only things. Next section. How am I doing for time? Okay. Technical quizzes. Does anyone remember Blockbusters, or am I just like really old? Okay, good. So my top tip is revise. So you're going to go to an interview for a JavaScript developer, Google interview questions of the JavaScript developers, because what will happen is like 20 questions will come up, and they're normally pretty short answers to just refresh your memory, so it's all there in your RAM, so that when you go into the test, you can just come up with the answer. And interviewers aren't that imaginative when it comes to tests. They have probably Googled the questions to ask themselves. Yeah, someone's nodding, totally happens. So, you know, revise, top tip. If you get a question you don't know the answer to, you can explain what you do know. So if they say, oh, what's ACID? When you're talking about relational databases, and you can remember that the A means atomic, and you can kind of vaguely explain that. Do that, and then don't worry about the CID bits. You can just say, oh, I'm not quite sure about the CID. I can't remember what they mean. I don't know. But at least it is better than sitting there going, oh, I don't know. Just explain what you do know. If you get a question you don't know the answer to, ask what the answer is. And if you don't understand it, ask for an explanation. I mean, it's going to show that you're interested, and it means you're going to learn something that will hopefully be useful for next time. This is one, once you've done a few of them, because they're all quite similar, you can get quite bored being the interviewee in these situations. So don't get bored and derail the process. So I have been interviewed for a Java development job and decided in the middle of one of these bog standard technical tests to try and persuade the guy that they should get rid of inheritance in Java and just have interfaces, which is actually something you could argue, but not in that situation. And I was doing the interview because it was for a friend who worked there, and he wanted me to interview there. And he said the guy turned me down because I was too challenging, which is true, right? So if you do get bored, just think to yourself, have good grace. This is just a tick boxing exercise, and do it nicely, and don't derail everything. Okay, how are we doing for time? Because I started late, I don't quite know when people would like me to finish. Should I do 10 more minutes? Or would you like me to wrap it up?
I think it's fine, we still have some time.
Yeah? I can do 10 minutes. Well, I'll do whiteboard challenges and then we'll stop, right? Right. I think that will take less than 10 minutes, so we'll be okay. Okay, whiteboard challenges are horrific, right? Well, I think so. So my top tip is to practice. By this, I mean try and replicate the conditions that you anticipate discovering in your interview at home as closely as possible. So get a big piece of paper, stick it on the wall, get a friend, or a rubber duck if needs be, but a friend, and get them to ask you a question that you've Googled off the internet. If you're going to a major company, you can Google Facebook interview questions. You can do that. And then get them to ask you the question, and you can practice doing it on the whiteboard and speaking aloud your thoughts as you go. And this will hopefully make you feel less uncomfortable once you actually get to doing it. Because the main challenge with whiteboard things is it's a bit unusual. I mean, not very many people narrate what they're doing as they're thinking. I think most people go and have a cup of tea and a little think and then come back, don't they? But yes, and the idea of drawing, yeah. So practice it as best you can. The second tip, they will explain to you a problem. If you don't understand it, keep talking to them until you do understand it. Because what happens is you feel awkward. You're like, I don't understand this. I don't want to seem really stupid. So maybe what I can do is I can start drawing stuff, and they'll say stuff, and then I'll figure out what the question is whilst doing the answer at the same time, which that's a recipe for disaster. That's never going to work. So no matter how awkward it is, make sure you definitely understand the problem to begin with. If you're doing interviews, actually, Pusher does a thing with whiteboard challenges. If we do them, not for all roles, we give the interviewee a printout of the problem first and leave them alone to have a think about it, and then come back in to ask them. So if you're giving out these challenges, that might be a way of alleviating this problem slightly. But yeah, no matter how awkward, if you don't quite understand it, you can say, well, I don't quite understand it, do you mean? And then draw out what you do understand and see how close you are. Narrate your thinking. So this is really important, because the interviewer doesn't give you a challenge and then leave the room with you there with a whiteboard drawing away, and then come back and go, okay, let's have a look at your whiteboard. That's not what happens, because they want to see you thinking as you go along. And the idea is that then they can get some insight into your mind. I don't know if that's true, but anyway. Narrate your thinking, and if you feel uncomfortable doing that, practice. So another thing to remember is your interviewer wants to help you. So even though it's quite hard to be thinking of technical details at the same time as kind of having your social brain switched on, well, I find it hard to parallelize the two. You should try and have empathy with your interviewer, because they'll be giving you hints, so you should be open and listening to them. They're trying to help you. It can be a bit ridiculous. Sometimes it feels like charades, but yeah, try and help them to help you. And this is a good tip. If you get told to do something for 20 or N or anything like that, start with 1, and then 2, and then 3. So whatever you're doing, try and do something easier. If there's something about the problem they've given you which is hard, go, well, it's really hard if you have this, but you know, what would make it easier is, let's try and do it for this easier case first, and blah, blah, blah. And even if you don't get anywhere, it shows some sort of logical approach to problems, right? So that's my top tip for whiteboard challenges. And when you're writing code, whatever you do, don't worry about perfect code. If your interviewer is bothered about you writing perfect syntax on a whiteboard, that's a red flag about them in my book. So you should maybe consider not working for them. Yeah, okay, that was it for that. So I think I'll give you maybe like my top tip, my first tip for technical interviews, and then we'll finish, right? So my first one is, you know the old-fashioned idea where your interviewer's there and they're going to grill you and put you under pressure and really test you? Well, when technical interviews, it's really not like that nowadays. In fact, they're trying desperately hard to get you to show off all your brilliantness so that they can then hire you because you're brilliant. That's what they want. So in the course of interviewing, they'll ask you things like, oh, tell me about something you've done that you're really proud of. Or they'll, I know, it's sort of embarrassing answering that one. Or they'll look at your CV and pick stuff that they feel is going to be really comfy ground for you. So they'll go, oh, I see you've worked a lot with X. Can you tell me all about X? Because I haven't worked with it a lot. So they're trying to get you to show off. So if they're trying to get you to show off, you know? It's a gift from them, so take it. And they'll enjoy the interview a lot more if you're happy. So they want you to be happy. And so that's my top tip for that. And I'm done, I think. Thank you all very much for listening.